King Harold of the Western Realms was a man who carried the crown like it was a mountain on his head. He had defended his kingdom for many years, but age came as quietly as winter snow, making his hands stiff and his voice heavy. He had only one child, his daughter Evelyn, and in her, the king's heart lived with both hope and sorrow. Evelyn had been born with a frail body. Since her childhood, she had been kept in rooms with glowing lamps and soft cushions. She grew tall, but thin, with pale skin and weak breath that often left her coughing when she walked more than a short distance. The healers had tried medicines, herbs, and blessings, yet nothing gave her the strength her father wished for her. She was gentle and kind, and people loved her soft voice, but tales spread through the halls and across the villages. They said she did not have the strength to rule, and that when war arrived, war always arrived, she would never be able to hold a sword, command soldiers, or save her people. The king heard the whispers. Sometimes he wanted to order silence, to banish any man or woman who dared question his daughter, but he knew that even his power could not erase doubt. His greatest fear was that one day he would no longer be able to guard her from both the gossip and the very real dangers of the world. Across the kingdom, there lived a man named Daniel Carter. He was no noble, no knight of fame, and no scholar from the old learning halls. He was a wanderer and a survivor, the kind of man who lived with dust on his clothes and scars on his arms. A man who had built his life through trial, sweat, and hard choices. He had worked among farmers during harvest, defended caravans on dangerous roads, and hunted in the deep woods where wolves and worse stalked the shadows. He was not polished, but his eyes carried calm strength that did not need any crown to prove itself. It was this man who stood before the king one quiet evening. The great hall still echoed with the shuffle of servants putting out torches and the sound of banners flapping against the stone walls. King Harold looked at Daniel not with suspicion, but with something closer to hope. He saw in him not wealth, not noble birth, but the kind of steadiness a soldier feels when meeting a comrade in arms. The king spoke slowly, as though each word scratched his heart. "My daughter is not broken, but she is untested by the world. I will not let her remain a shadow, hidden in safe rooms. She needs fire, she needs trial, or one day she will be crushed by this kingdom's enemies. I give her to you. Take her beyond the palace. Teach her to stand and to fight. Do not protect her with silk, for silk has already trapped her. Give her the life of strength I cannot give." Daniel listened, and though he had never spoken to royalty before, he nodded with the kind of plain understanding only men who have known hunger and danger can carry. Did not ask why the king trusted him, nor did he lean on ceremony. He only said, "She will walk the path herself. And I will not carry her, but I will walk beside her." That night, Evelyn was told what her father had decided. At first, her heart raced with fear. She had never spent a night outside her chambers without guard or comfort. The thought of leaving the palace, the only world she had known, turned her hands cold. Still, when she looked into her father's weary eyes, she saw not cruelty, but desperate love. Daniel found her waiting by the gates at dawn. She wore a cloak too fine for travel and carried a small pack that wobbled on her shoulders. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight. She looked at him as if she expected pity, but none came. Instead, Daniel adjusted the strap of her pack so it sat steady and said, "The road is waiting. You will not find it easy, but you will find yourself upon it." And so, with the rising sun glinting on the high palace stones, the frail princess and the weathered wanderer stepped out through the gates together. None could yet see that this first step would be the beginning of a story not of weakness, but of transformation that would echo through their land for generations. The path stretched wide before them, dusty and uneven, scattered with small stones that caught the light of morning. Evelyn walked nervously by Daniel's side. Her steps were slow, and her breath came quicker than it should have from so simple a road. The palace had always shielded her from rough ground, from long walks, and from the weight of carrying her own pack. Now, every pebble felt like a mountain under her thin shoes, and every breeze that touched her face seemed sharper than she remembered from her windows. Daniel did not turn to comfort her. He simply kept his pace steady, expecting her to follow. He carried his own pack, heavier than hers, and walked as if he had walked that road 1,000 times before. Evelyn wondered if he noticed her stumbling steps, but if he did, he gave no sign. By noon, her legs trembled. Sweat darkened the edges of her cloak. She stopped, leaning on a stone beside the road, trying to catch her breath. He turned his head then, only for a moment, and said, "The world does not wait for us. We move forward." She wanted to cry out, to tell him she was not made for this road. But something in his calm voice, without pity, without harshness, gave her pause. He had accepted no weakness, but he had also not mocked her. With trembling legs, she forced herself up, following one slow step at a time. They made camp at the edge of a forest. Daniel built the fire with ease, gathering wood, stacking it, and striking sparks until flames lit the dark. Evelyn sat nearby, her body aching in places she had not known could ache. When the fire warmed her, she thought of the velvet blankets and feather pillows she had left behind. Yet, as her eyes lifted to the great night sky, countless stars spread above her, wide and endless in their silence. She had never seen them so bright from within the thick walls of the palace. Daniel handed her a piece of bread, rough and simple. She frowned at its hardness and longed for sweet fruits and warm meals. Still, when she ate, she found the taste was not unpleasant. Hunger made each bite heavier with meaning. The days that followed built pressure upon her. Each morning began with walking, always walking. Some paths climbed hills, others wound through thick woods. Her back ached beneath the pack, her feet filled with blisters, and her hands were scratched from thorns when she tried to push aside branches. She wanted often to stop, but Daniel never slowed for long. He said little, but when he did, every word gave weight to her resolve. Once, as they crossed a narrow stream, she slipped on the wet stone and landed hard on her knees. Mud stained her cloak, cold water rushed over her hands, and shame filled her eyes. As she looked up, waiting for him to pull her up. Instead, his voice came from the far bank, firm but quiet. "Stand, you can do it." The words struck her harder than any hand could have. He would not lift her. She had to lift herself. Digging her hands into the muddy stones, she shoved herself to her feet and stepped forward with teeth clenched. When her boots touched the far bank, she saw a thin smile cross his lips before he turned to walk on. That one small smile carried more warmth than any praise she had ever been given. With each stumble came new strength. Her back grew used to the pack, her feet toughened, her lungs found deeper breath. Though her body still tired, she began to notice her stride was longer than before, her step steadier. She would fall behind, but no longer so far. She would tremble, but she no longer collapsed. One night, the howls of wolves echoed from the woods. Evelyn froze, shivering as the cries moved closer. Daniel handed her a blade, not decorated like those kept in palace halls, but sharp and plain. She stared at it with wide eyes, her hands shaking. "I cannot," she whispered. "You can," he said. That was all. When the shadows moved between the trees and the glowing eyes appeared, fear squeezed her heart. Yet when one wolf padded close, teeth gleaming in firelight, she raised the blade with both hands. Her arms shook, but she did not drop it. The wolf snarled and retreated when Daniel stepped forward, but the test had already taken place. She had not run. That night, as she lay awake by the fire, she realized her fear had not destroyed her. She had faced it, even if clumsy and weak. For the first time in her life, she began to believe her father might have seen something inside her that she herself had never known existed.
Ow.
And so her journey pressed on, painful and slow. The seasons changed slowly as Evelyn walked beside Daniel through hills, forests, and open plains. Her steps no longer faltered as they once had. The girl who had left the palace with trembling legs was now a young woman whose body carried strength she did not know she could build. Scars marked her hands, and her skin had become darker from the sun. At times she caught a reflection in a stream and hardly recognized herself. Daniel continued to teach her, though never with long speeches. His lessons came through action. One morning he placed a wooden staff in her hands, instead of the fine steel blade she carried. She frowned at the rough stick and asked why she must use it rather than her sword. He told her plainly, "If you cannot master wood, you will never master steel." From that day she trained each morning. Daniel pushed her to fight with the staff, to balance her weight, to turn her weakness into speed. The staff struck against his with loud cracks, and each time she lost her breath, he made her rise again. Bruises soon covered her arms and legs, yet instead of anger, she began to feel pride in them. Each mark was proof that she was no longer fragile. It was during one of these training days by the riverbank that Evelyn truly felt the change inside her. Daniel struck her staff so hard that it flew from her hands and into the sand. She fell, gasping, her knees cut on rough stones. Old Evelyn would have cried and begged for rest. But this new Evelyn gritted her teeth, grabbed the staff again, and charged forward with a strength that startled even him. His eyes flickered with approval as her staff struck close to his arm. Though he disarmed her once more, he did not hide his rare smile. After training, as they sat by the fire, she asked in a quiet voice, "Why do you not go easy on me?" Daniel looked across the flames at her and said, "Because the world will not. Will either fall as the girl they think you are, or stand as the woman you are meant to be. No one can carry you there, not even me." His words burned inside her mind long after he fell asleep. For the first time, she no longer wished for a life of comfort. She wanted to fight, to prove herself, to walk the path that only she could walk. One evening, people from a small village welcomed them. The farmers had heard of bandits troubling their fields and stealing their grain. Evelyn listened as the villagers pleaded for Daniel's help. He agreed, but to her surprise, he told them that Evelyn would also stand with him. Fear filled her heart at the thought of facing not wolves or mud, but men. When the bandits came in the darkness, torches lighting their way, Evelyn stood at Daniel's side with her staff in hand. Her body trembled, but she did not step back. The fight was loud with shouts and clashing wood. One bandit struck her arm, sending waves of pain through her. But instead of falling back, she spun her staff and struck his leg until he stumbled. She had never heard herself shout before, but a cry of defiance escaped her lips, strong and sharp. The bandits, unprepared for resistance, fled into the night. The villagers cheered, and Evelyn stood among them, her chest heaving with breath, her staff stained with mud. She realized she had fought, truly fought, and not failed. The villagers bowed and called her brave. She lowered her eyes, feeling heat on her cheeks, but deep inside she knew they spoke the truth. Later, when she and Daniel left the village, her voice was no longer soft when she spoke to him. "I fought as you told me I must. I was afraid, but I did not break." Daniel walked a few paces ahead, as he often did, but she saw the corner of his mouth lift. "Now you begin to understand," he said. From then on, her training was not only about movement of staff or strength of body, it was about command of her own spirit. She began to rise each morning before Daniel called her, striking the staff against the air, moving through drills again and again until the sound of her strikes echoed across the valley. When her arms grew numb, she continued, forcing herself to go on. Each night, when she looked at the stars above their camp, she no longer saw a wide and fearful sky. She saw a greater path opening before her. A path to become not a shadow hidden in her father's court, but a flame strong enough to challenge anything that came against her kingdom. The call of war came like thunder rolling across the land. Messengers rode through villages and towns, their horses foaming as they carried grim news. An enemy force had risen beyond the borders, large and merciless, marching toward the kingdom. For years, farmers and herders whispered that war would come, and now their fears had become real. Evelyn and Daniel heard the news when they returned to the outskirts of the capital. The fields around the city were filled with tents, soldiers sharpening blades and preparing armor. The air smelled of smoke and sweat, mixed with the heavy sound of drums from morning until night. Evelyn could see from the fear on the men's faces that this battle would not be easy. King Harold had grown weaker since she had last seen him. His voice was softer, and his shoulders slouched under the weight of many years. When Evelyn entered his hall, dressed not in silk, but in simple leathers marked with dust and scars, the courtiers gasped. They hardly recognized the woman who stepped before the throne. Gone was the pale, fragile girl who had once hid behind her father's side. In her place stood a young woman, steady as stone, scarred but unbowed. The king wept at the sight of her. "My daughter, I see now what he has shaped you into. You are no longer frail, you are strong. But strength must now be tested in a fire greater than training. The enemy comes with numbers beyond count. If we lose, our people will fall into chains." Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time she did not feel fear settle in her chest. Instead, she felt the fire Daniel had spoken of. She knelt, kissed her father's hand, and rose. then I will not hide from it. I will stand where I am needed." The army marched to the plains where the enemy gathered. Lines of soldiers stretched far across the horizon, shields shimmering in the sun. Evelyn rode at the front beside Daniel, a staff at her saddle and a sword at her side. Her heart thumped as she looked at the vast numbers, but she did not falter. The battle began with a roar. Arrows filled the air like a storm of black birds. Shields clashed and blades rang out with the cries of men. Evelyn fought at the center, her arms swift and fierce. She spun her staff against the helmets of foes, struck with speed, and cut with steel when she needed. For every step she took back, she forced herself to take two forward. Her voice rang out to soldiers near her, calling them not to fall, to fight on. Daniel fought beside her, steady as ever, his strength cutting through the line of enemies. At times they shielded each other, one blocking when the other was struck, moving like a single force. Evelyn had thought she knew the weight of training, but only now did she taste the full weight of survival, where each mistake meant death. Smoke and dust filled the sky, but through it all, she did not break. When an enemy soldier struck her across the arm, her blood spilled. Yet instead of falling, she raised her blade higher. The pain became part of her fire. She shouted with a voice so loud that soldiers around her lifted their courage and pushed against the enemy line. Hours passed, but the enemy could not break them. At last the tide turned, their foes retreating across the field in broken ranks. The plain fell silent except for the moans of the wounded and the sound of shields settling back into the dirt. When the dust settled, Evelyn stood, covered in sweat and blood, her hair tangled, her arm aching, but her body still straight. She looked across the field and saw men and women staring at her not as a princess to be pitied, but as a warrior who had led them through the storm. Even the oldest of soldiers nodded in quiet respect. That night, as fires burned across the camp, Daniel sat near her, his simple cloak wrapped around his shoulders. He said nothing for a long time, only watching the sparks rise into the dark sky. At last he spoke one line. "Today you fought not as the girl who left the palace. Today you fought as the woman the kingdom needed." Evelyn did not answer. She only looked into the flames, holding her blade across her knees. Deep inside, she understood that there would be more battles to come, more storms waiting to break over them. But she also knew that she no longer belonged to weakness. She had faced the trial of war, and she had stood tall. The days after the great battle were filled with both sorrow and pride. The fields outside the capital carried the weight of victory, but also the silence of men who would never return home. Farmers, soldiers, and townsfolk built fires each night to honor the fallen. Their voices carried songs of mourning, yet also songs of gratitude that their kingdom still stood free. Evelyn walked among them, her arms bound in bandages, her body sore but unbroken. She felt every gaze that followed her. People no longer looked at her as a girl hidden in her father's palace. They saw her as the woman who had stood with them in fire and blood, who had refused to bend when the enemy pressed hardest. Mothers who had once pitied her now laid hands on her shoulder, whispering words of thanks. Young men smiled when she passed and called her voice strong. She smiled back, but her heart was thoughtful, for she knew this was no end but the beginning of a longer journey. When she returned to the palace, her father greeted her in the great hall. His hair was white, his face lined deeply, and his crown seemed almost too heavy to hold. He rose shakily when she entered. For a long time he only stared, as if searching for the child he had once carried in his arms. But that child was gone. Standing before him was someone who had walked through fire and come back with steel in her eyes. "My daughter," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you are more than I dared wish for. What I could not give, Daniel has helped build. And what Daniel guided, you have made your own. You are no longer frail. You are the hope of this land." Evelyn bent beside him, pressing her hand to his. "Father, you gave me to the road. I hated it at the start. I feared the world outside these walls. But now I see what you saw, that a kingdom cannot be kept by silk or safety. It is kept by will, by sacrifice, by the strength of those who are ready to bleed for its people." Tears shone in the old king's eyes. He kissed her brow and sat again, knowing deep inside that his time as ruler was nearing its close. Whether by sickness, age, or rest, he would one day pass the crown. And when that day came, he now believed no one else could carry it more truly than Evelyn. Life in the city changed with her return. Evelyn no longer lived hidden behind silent chambers. She walked freely among the people, training with soldiers at dawn, speaking with villagers who came to sell their goods, listening to their troubles. At night, she studied old books of law and history, not because her father ordered it, but because she wished to understand more of the world she would guard. She became both the blade and the guiding voice, sharp in battle and calm in council. Still, she often walked with Daniel. Though she now stood taller and straighter, she always kept respect for the man who had carried none of her burdens, but had forced her to carry them herself. Their bond was quiet but unshakable, built on trials shared in the dust and dark of the road. People whispered that he would soon leave, for wanderers rarely stayed in palaces. Yet wherever he went, Evelyn knew part of his strength would remain inside her forever. The day finally arrived when danger returned at the border. Though smaller than the Great War before, Evelyn did not hesitate. She rode to the edge of the kingdom at the head of her troop, her banner flying behind her. Soldiers followed her with steady feet, their trust clear in their eyes. When she gave the signal to advance, her voice boomed with authority, and no man or woman doubted her. She was no longer thought of as only the daughter of Harold. It was the warrior who stood for them all. Victory came quickly that time, for her presence alone filled her troops with courage. And when she returned again, the city erupted with cheers, calling her name not with pity, but with love deeper than fear. She had truly become what her father hoped she might be: a protector, a leader, even a queen in spirit before the crown was ever placed upon her head. At last, when her father's final days came, Evelyn stood at his side until his breath grew quiet and his eyes closed forever. The crown passed to her, not as a fragile weight, but as a weapon she was ready to wield. When she walked onto the balcony, the people below lifted their hands and voices to greet her not as a frail child, but as the fiercest queen their eyes had ever seen. Evelyn raised her sword above her head, the sunlight flashing upon the steel. Her voice rang over the city, carrying the promise that she would guard them always. And in that moment, all who heard her knew the frail princess was gone forever. In her place stood a warrior queen, born from hardship, proven by battle, and bound to lead her people into whatever storms the future might bring.